Hello, everyone. Again, a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. If you have questions throughout, please use the Q&A section to write down your questions. My name is Pam Nurse, and I am the Executive Director of the Federation for Children with Special Needs. And on behalf of the Federation, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this webinar. We are very happy to be co-sponsoring this important event with the Special Needs Action Network, SPAN. We continue to find during these uncertain times that collaboration is more important than ever, and we value our partnership with SPAN and many, many other organizations. The mission of the Federation to inform, educate, and empower families to connect with the resources that they need for their children to thrive is extremely necessary during these uncertain times. And we are working to make resources available, answer questions, and bring concerns and solutions to families and our professional partners. And just wanted to highlight very briefly a few things that the Federation is working on. We have a call center to take calls on special education, health, and community needs. It is now open. Through our Family Ties project, we provide information about and referrals to early intervention programs. Staff are available to help with specifics, as well as any questions about children with special health needs. We are reaching out to CPACs, the Special Education Parent Advisory Councils, to help them with best practices for reaching out to families and schools. And every day we're updating our website for frequently asked questions and other important resources and guidances. Each weekday we are holding a Facebook Live event at 2 o'clock with information about health, education, transitions, community, and other events important to families. And again, I want to thank you on behalf of the Federation for joining us. I know we are very excited today to hear from our panel. Please reach out if you have any questions for the Federation. And right now, I want to turn it over to Beth Tremblay Hall, the president of SPAN.
Thank you, Pam, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us this morning. As you can imagine, we expect about 500 participants here today. We have a wide range in our audience, including parents, non-attorneys, non-attorney advocates, special education surrogate parents, parent site attendees, board members from both the SPAN and the Federation, and a vast array of other stakeholders. My name is Beth Tremblay Hall. I'm an educational advocate and paralegal at Education Consulting, Advocacy, and Legal Services. I am also the president of the Special Needs Advocacy Network that we fondly refer to as SPAN. Our mission is to endorse the professional growth and development of its members and to act as a primary resource for advocates. We are pleased that during this uncertain time, we are able to come together to share with you important information. We are delighted to be partnering again with the Federation for Children with Special Needs to host a series of presentations as we all work to respond to COVID-19. We are humbled and honored by the generosity and talent and time that these presenters, our amazing support staff, have contributed to this presentation. I would like to draw your attention to a few key activities related to SPAN's effort to support our members and advocates during this time. We have created a new webpage on our website. We have created a new email, covid19@spanmass.org, where people can share their ideas, resources, suggestions for us. Like this program today, we will continue in several ways to do public outreach. We have used our Concord discussion group as a forum to create weekly online case discussion groups for our advocates. As many of you are aware, we are also proud of our partnership with both the Federation and the ARC as we move through these uncertain times together. I do want to let Pam mentions that we are to use the Q&A portion if you want to submit questions. There's also a chat portion if you have questions kind of about tech or things like that. We will try to address those as quickly as we're able to. This is also closed captioned for anybody that may need it. That will be part of the recording. But there's also a feature at the bottom in the Zoom icons if you would like to use that feature. SPAN is a 501c3 nonprofit. In these uncertain times, if you are able to help, please do. All the donations are tax deductible to the extent allowed by law. A new donation button can be found on our homepage, spanmass.org. I would let you know, I would also let you know, I'm sorry, I got a little distracted, Pam, so I apologize if I'm repeating, but there is also a donation button on the Federation website, and they are nonprofit as well. With that, I would like to welcome Lisa Lapinski, the Vice President of Programming for the Special Needs Advocacy Network. Lisa?
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be with you again this week. My name is Lisa Lapinski. I am a special education attorney with a private practice, and I am also privileged to be the Vice President of Programming for the Special Needs Advocacy Network. This is the second in what we are hoping will be a series of webinars co-hosted by the Special Needs Advocacy Network and the Federation for Children with Special Needs. At last week's initial webinar, we focused on the state of the current guidance, latest guidance from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and from the U.S. Department of Education regarding the provision of services, special education services to students during the current COVID-19 pandemic and extended closure of schools. For today's webinar, we are pleased to have three presenters who will offer some practical strategies and assistance for parents who are finding themselves now parenting and trying to do their own jobs and also now managing their children's education at home. I am also pleased to be joined today by special education attorney Tim Sindelar, who is probably well known by many of you by reputation, if not from having worked with him. He is a wonderful advocate for children and donates a lot of his time generously, including as part of our webinar today. So right now, as you can see, I have an agenda right now posted on my screen here. Our three presenters, I'm going to introduce our first presenter, who is Ann Howard. Ann is a professor of education at the Fitchburg State University. She coordinates graduate and undergraduate programs in severe disabilities and also consults with families and school systems to facilitate inclusion and optimal education programs for students with significant disabilities. She's going to speak to us specifically about the piece of helping families to manage remote learning at home with their children with disabilities. So without further ado, I introduce you to Ann Howard. Ann?
I know, I'm fine. I'm coming. Oh, goodness. Oh.
So Ann, so the share button is a little green button. If you hover around the outside, there you go.
Okay.
Got it.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you very much, Lisa. I'm very pleased to be here with you today. I incredibly appreciate the work of SPAN and the Federation to pull all of this together. I'm also incredibly appreciative of all the individuals who are participating today. We all have overwhelming plates, and it's wonderful that you've taken the time to participate today. All right. So I'm sharing my, oh, there we go. Okay. So I just wanted to start out with a few initial thoughts. Clearly this, we're talking about a very heterogeneous population in terms of abilities, disabilities, ages. And so I'm really talking in fairly general terms. There are certainly more specific resources available for students depending on their age and disability. One of the things to really think about is that the majority of students spend most of their time in general education classrooms, which means that one of the challenges is that families are communicating both with special educators and with general educators. Obviously, moving on, we're going to be talking more specifically about students with behavioral challenges, and I think that's definitely one of the more challenging population groups that we're dealing with during this crisis. So there are many lists of resources available. I'm going to highlight a few of them. If you have not watched the webinar from last week, I highly recommend that you do. It was incredibly helpful. One of the things that they mentioned was the quote about don't let perfection be the enemy of good. And there are so many resources available that you don't want to get stuck just thinking that you have to keep looking for everything. If you find a few good resources, that's really what you need. So I'm going to talk about homeschool collaboration, some of the options available for instruction, some basic strategies for instruction, and some final thoughts and resources. So one of the first things I think that parents and obviously advocates can do is to be aware of Massachusetts DESE expectations of school districts. They've indicated that school districts have to provide strategies, assessments, projects, and packets, general ed materials with accommodations, and also materials directly from special educators and related service providers. They also have to provide resources to families to help students continue to be engaged in learning. And one of the, I think, most important things that DESE has said is that there needs to be a point person from the IEP team that's going to communicate with the students' parents or guardians during this time, that they need to do that on a regular basis. And I put the little website link at the bottom here. So one of the things I think DESE did a nice job with is thinking about that we're looking both at services and supports and also instruction, not just individualized instruction, but whole class and small group instruction. I think that we need to really think broadly about education. So DESE has talked about specialized instructional opportunities, related services that could be modified to be effectively provided, and talks about how FAPE can be provided through delivering instruction, through remote instruction, sending materials to students through online, teletherapy. You can certainly look at the list. So I think what we want to think about is what is going to be meaningful in a student's life right now. So rather than thinking about needing to write a 5-paragraph essay that's going to be evaluated on MCAS, maybe they're writing to relatives. In my neighborhood, somebody distributed flyers so that we would go out and hit pots and pans at a certain time each day. That's another way that students could engage in their writing activities. So again, I think it's really about thinking broadly about education at this point. Clearly, communication with school and your child's team is huge. Schools, you know, I talked about being clear on what the expectations for school districts are, understanding that. But I think parents and advocates really need to reach out to the schools and ask for services. MAC has a sample letter on their website that I've posted here. And it really needs to be a collaborative effort. I think one of the important things to remember is that parents know their child better than anyone else. And rather than just going to the school system and saying, what are you going to provide for my child? It would be important for parents to make suggestions on what would be most helpful both to you and to your child. And ultimately, Tim Sindelar made this point in last week's webinar, the reality is that it's really not possible for your child to get all the services and benefits that they would get for going to school a full 5 days a week. And that's the case for all children, not just children with disabilities. So I think we all need to be prepared to compromise and try to work through this in collaboration with people at school. So you know your child's IEP, you know your child as a person. I think looking ahead that you always want to ask what's going to make the biggest difference. So thinking about the IEP, we have PLEP A and PLEP B with accommodations and specially designed instruction. So how can we make those accommodations work at home? We also need to, I think, make use of Grid A consultation. And if your child doesn't have consultation on their IEP and they're not able to get direct services from a related service provider, ask if you can have those services, have that consultation. So I started out my career as a PT before being a special educator, and have always been an advocate of integrating related services. I think this is really where parents have an opportunity to really ask therapists, how can I integrate PT, OT, speech, whatever, into our day-to-day lives, rather than thinking of it as a special separate service. So I'm sure you've heard this before. I think one of the big things is to set up a schedule and routines. That schedule may look different for different students. If you have a student with very severe disabilities, they may need an object schedule. Ideally, your child should be involved in putting the schedule together. Here we have an art project, you know, a way to extend what they're doing. I would say post the schedule where everybody in the family can see it. Most students benefit from having a schedule, or many students, where they're able to check off a task, what's completed. I don't know about you, but I have lists all over and I feel better when I can check off things. And I think many students feel really good about that as well. And it might be a good time to start a self-management strategy with the child, you know, rather than you checking off things, that the child can check off things. You know, and it could be about table manners, it could be about an assignment checklist, but see if that student can really take some more responsibility for what they're doing. I think for parents, it's also an opportunity to be a role model, certainly around hygiene. We've all heard countless times about washing our hands, for how long and how to do it. I think kids need to see that happening. You know, and you know, here's a math activity. You can check off the number of times you've washed your hands. You can graph it. It's also really important to do physical activity. There's so many resources about doing yoga online. And if you haven't used Go Noodle, I absolutely encourage you to check that out. It's, you know, it's, a lot of it is geared towards younger students, but it's really pretty fun for older students as well. You also want to model being connected with friends and family. Figure out ways that your child can do a video chat with another child from their class. I think definitely missing friends is pretty important. Being aware of your own anxiety of fears. Obviously, we're going to have some communication a little bit later about this, but I think it's really important for, if you are feeling really anxious and fearful, figure out a way to sort of keep that from your child. Identify projects that help others. We talked about writing letters to neighbors and so forth. And I think really try to focus on what's positive about this difficult time. When you're doing structured learning sessions, it's helpful to make an agenda for the session. One of the things that helps all of us is having choices. So having controlled choice. Do you want to do your math or do you want to do your English first? Being really clear with your student about how long you're going to be working. Having a clear beginning, middle, and end. This is what we're doing to start. There's my timer that's going off. So I'm going to try to be quick. Being frequent reinforcement for the child. Positive behavior supports tell us that we need 4 positive for 1 corrective response. And if you're working with a child, be sure to have a variety of levels of challenge. Start with something that's relatively easy so they can feel good about it and they want to come back and work with you again. So I mentioned there are many, many more resources available. I happen to think Mass Advocates for Children has one of the best websites of resources available. Mass Down Syndrome Congress also has some excellent materials. I found 2 resources I thought were helpful in terms of just thinking about being supportive to students and helping them deal with more of the mental health, but I know we're going to be going into that later. So some of you have probably already seen this online on Facebook, this letter from the Long Beach superintendent, who in her letter to her parents, she said, whether this lasts 2 more weeks or 2 more months, don't worry. We'll get your kids caught up. It's our job. It's what we're trained to do. Don't worry if you're not the perfect homeschooling parent. Don't worry if you're torn between working at home and helping your kids. Don't let your kids spend 9 hours a day doing schoolwork. Cut them off and tell the teacher it was too much. Don't let these days be joyless for your kids. And here's the part that I think is really significant. She said, 20 years from now, your children won't remember what they learned during the spring of 2020. Honestly, they won't. They will remember the time they stayed at home with you or with whomever is caring for them for a few weeks. They will tell their own children about feeling safe and loved and peaceful during this anxious time. They will remember the fun things you did with them. Do what is most important for your families these days. Together we will come through this and we'll look at the world differently. Be kind to yourself and wrap your kids in love. And this is a cartoon I often use in trainings, that we always have to look back and say, you know what, that's not right. We do the best we can, and that's all that we can ask of both our children, our students, and of ourselves, and also of teachers who are really facing a significant challenge in moving forward to support your students. So that is it for me.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Howard. Those words of wisdom, I think, are going to be extremely valuable to us in the weeks ahead. At this point, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Mariela Vargas. I've known Dr. Vargas for longer than both of us would like to admit. She's an incredibly dedicated and knowledgeable BCBA and has worked with a lot of students with really significant behaviors. She's here today to share with us some notions about how we can work effectively around behaviors in this complicated distance learning environment. So thank you, Dr. Vargas.
Good morning. Thank you for coming today.
Can you see the little, the green button at the bottom of the screen, share screen? Sorry about this, folks. It always works well in tech rehearsal, and then, you know, you get on stage, right?
Yeah, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
We can definitely hear you, but we can't see your screen yet. I can try to pull up your PowerPoint if you're not going to be able to get it on the screen, and run it from my screen.
All
You
right.
got it.
How is that?
Well, we don't have the PowerPoint running yet. We can just see your home screen, but yep, I'm sure we'll get it going
There
here
we
in
go.
just a minute.
It's opening. So thank you so much for coming today. So here we are in the middle of a pandemic, all working hard to learn new things, like how to do Zoom meetings and PowerPoint. So now we have to think, and we have to think fast in order to make sure our children continue to make progress. Because, you know, for many children, they're going to bounce right back after a few months without school, but we know that our children need us, and they need us to work as a team in order to maintain those skills that we work so hard to achieve. So some of you may know my specialty is autism. There's a wide range of children with autism, so hopefully this will cater to most of the families that we work with. So a couple of things: schools must provide FAPE. Obviously, it's going to be remotely as opposed to live because of social distancing, but they do have obligation to provide as many activities and resources to special education children as they are doing for typically developing children. Now, how about insurance companies? So at this point, every insurance company that we work with has approved ABA via telehealth. So we have been authorized by every insurance company to provide services remotely. There were some insurance companies that allowed us to use telehealth before. And there were some restrictions as to what kinds of platforms we were allowed to use. At this point, they have lifted all those restrictions, so we are basically allowed to use whatever works. So in the past few weeks, I've been trying different platforms, and I find FaceTime only one-to-one is a little bit unstable. Every now and then it just disappears and you have to come back. It works better on phones than iPads in my experience. There's Google, which has the advantage of being HIPAA compliant. And if you already have Google Business, then you can definitely use Google Hangouts. And then there's Zoom, that we are all, you know, becoming to be very familiar with. Just remember when you do Zoom meetings to make sure that they're private, because there have been reports of Zoom bombing where people randomly just walk into your meeting and do inappropriate things. So we definitely don't want that. Now, what kinds of services, of ABA services, can be provided remotely? We can definitely do initial assessments for new families. So that can include a skill assessment such as the Vineland that can be done remotely. And there are certain kinds of criterion-based assessments that can be adapted to do for telehealth. So we're working on that. And it's definitely the parent report here is very important, because, you know, at this point, you're all alone with your children or your very close family. So we need to work with the parents and the caregivers that are there every day, just like, you know, ABA always has indicated that we should do. And now it's more important than ever, because it's not really about what, you know, everybody else thinks is important. It's really about what you as a parent want us to work on in these, you know, 4, 6, 8-12 weeks that you're going to be at home with your children. We can also do functional behavior assessment, and I will talk about that later. And of course, parent consult. So parent consult, we were allowed to do it remotely for some insurance companies before, and it's definitely one of the most important things that we will do. Most parents in the past really prefer to do phone conferences, and now insurance companies are allowing to do that. So that's wonderful, because what parent, usually parents prefer to be on the phone and then have their questions answered, as opposed to a live meeting, which right now, because of social distancing, is not going to be possible anyway. And then the other thing that we can provide is group parent consults. So given that we're all going to be with our children, one of the things that can be done is we can train parents as registered behavior technicians. So we can do the same training that we have been using to train behavior therapists, so we can train parents. And this has something that has always been encouraged and offered by insurance companies and schools. But I think now it's just more important than ever to take that very seriously and begin to focus on it. And it's also, I think, it will be a source of support for families. So families can share ideas. Sometimes the best ideas that we've ever had have come from other families that are in the same situation as we are. Now, of course, we can work directly with the behavior technician, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how that works remotely. And what has been wonderful has been virtual social skills groups, because children miss their friends, and what is happening with many of my students is that they are gravitating back towards those interests that they had been abandoning. So, kids that hadn't talked about Thomas the Train and for years are going back to that because they're really missing that constant social stimulation that school and social skills groups provide in center-based services. So given that we're not going to be able to do live social skills group for a while, we can certainly do virtual social skills groups. The challenge, the lesson is, so in a typical social skills group, you start with a lesson, usually something working on conversation, on how to use visual information to be a social detective. And that piece is pretty straightforward. We can do that remotely, as well as the typical check-in. We typically use the zones of regulation, but it's basically just asking people how they're doing, how are you feeling that day, and linking your emotions to coping strategies. I think the most challenging part of the social skills group was, as what some of my students have been very vocal to express, is that it's harder to have fun virtually. When you're at the center, usually they do their check-in, they do their lesson, then we have conversation while we are having snack, and then we get to play. So children have missed some of their favorite toys. They miss the Wii that they usually play with. So the challenge is really to find games that can be done virtually. And typically we avoid certain popular games that are online, but I think we're going to be doing groups focusing on things like Minecraft Creative, which is one of the most popular games that typically developing children play. And I think this is an opportunity for our children with autism and other disabilities to learn some of those games and be able to have fun after we do our social thinking or our social skills lesson. So definitely virtual social skills. What we're doing is we're doing shorter groups. We used to have 2 or 3 hour groups, but it was mostly because of the convenience of the family. Like, it's very difficult to come to a social group every day. What we're doing remotely now is we're doing 1 hour groups every day, plus movie nights on weekends, so we can provide that social stimulation that all children need, but especially children with autism, and then doing it every day as opposed to once or twice a week. Now, the direct work by the behavior technician is definitely one of the most challenging one of the most challenging things that we are doing, because it really requires a lot of participation from the parent. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, but this is definitely the most challenging. However, insurance companies and schools are encouraging us to do that remotely. And I'm going to go back to direct work in a minute. So one of the questions that have been asked is how many hours can we provide? And it really depends on the treatment plan or the IEP. Most insurance, it's not really an issue with Mass Health as much. Mass Health has always been very good about increasing hours if there's a clinical rationale for it. Private insurances, we're not sure, but definitely whatever is in the treatment plan or the IEP should be the minimum that can be provided. So how do we provide direct services and parent consult to young children, toddlers and preschoolers? It's much, much easier when the relationship is already formed. So we have some families that just jumped right into telehealth because of social distancing. So what we do is we have the behavior technician Zoom into the home, and sometimes the families use their big screen TVs, so the therapist looks, you know, big in remotely, and then the children who already have a relationship with him or with her are excited to see her. It's a little bit like, you know, the way I see it is a little bit like Sesame Street, right? You know, or Dora. You see somebody up on the screen, and then typically the therapist gives the instruction. And then for young children, we do need the parent to be there, hands-on. And the way we see it is a little bit as the parent being the hands of the therapist. So the therapist gives the instruction, okay, all right, clap your hands. And then the parent provides the physical prompt necessary for the child to follow that instruction. And this is where prompting is going to be probably the first thing that we have to teach parents that are participating in telehealth, because it's really the essence. One of the most important parts of discrete trial training is to help the child produce that correct response. So if you say clap your hands and the child doesn't clap their hands, then you know the child is not learning anything. And if you say clap your hands and you always prompt them physically, then they're always going to expect that prompt, and they're never going to learn how to do that independently. So really what we want to do is we want to fade those prompts gradually using differential reinforcement. So at first we help the child, you know, produce that response. So say we say touch your nose, and then we physically prompt. And then gradually we take away that prompt, and we only reinforce when the child is performing that skill independently. So differential reinforcement and prompting is just really very important. And that is, if anything else, that's if the first thing that we really have to learn when we're learning discrete trials is how to prompt and how to fade those prompts, because we can deliver the instructions. The BCBA can Skype in with a behavior technician, and we can continue doing the parent consult, the progress reports that you know won't change, and we can decide what to teach next. We can tell you what comes next, but we are really going to need all the parents to learn how to prompt and fade those prompts so we can continue teaching our students. So one of the things that I've always, for those of you who have come to my presentations before, that we always have to keep in mind, and I have permission from this little boy's dad to show this video, but one of the things that we want to always keep in mind is to teach children how to work independently. Because one of the things that happens when we have all these wonderful services is that children become accustomed to being hurried every step of the way. So when they don't see their teacher saying, okay, good job, that was awesome, then they just stop working. So one of the things that we really have to work on is making sure that they work by themselves. And you can see my student here, he has to complete those three tasks, and these are all very, very easy tasks for him. These are really, truly very easy for him. But the key is, can he do it independently without having the teacher say good job every moment, and just wait until he actually finishes the task before, you know, reinforcing. And then this is really important for parents, because there's going to be a point where you have to make dinner, where you have to jump into the shower, where you have to take care of your other children. So to have the child engage in a productive activity, even though it's pre-trained, mastered activities, without, you know, the constant prompting and reinforcement and physical presence of the therapist or the parent, is going to be really important. So we always have independent functioning as a goal from the very beginning when they're little until they're older, but that is definitely is going to be a very, very important task for all the students now that we're all at home. So now, how do we work with children, with older children? And it's really, I think, well, my daughters are tweens, so I'm having direct experience on this. And it really, it's a question like I mentioned before in the previous presentation, to try to structure things as much as possible, make a list of assignments, estimate the time for each, you know, have them pick, you know, what is easiest, you know, what have you already started by yourself, what you think you need help with, that we can spend this time together working on the thing that you need most help. And then how much time do we have? How much time do you have before your Zoom meeting, or before, you know, grandma calls, or before we sit down to dinner? And then we also want to sort of gauge their energy. I think, you know, are you really feeling like you can conquer the world right now? You want to tackle, you know, the math first, or, you know, you're not feeling great. Maybe you want to do something a little bit easier, a little bit less time consuming, so we can get those smaller tasks done and then move on to the hardest things. We also want to see the mood. I think, like we all know, children are anxious. I mean, we're all anxious. This is our first, for most of us, well, for all of us, this is our first pandemic. So I don't think anybody has the right answers. But just like everybody else, you know, sometimes our children wake up and they feel wonderful. And then sometimes, you know, they wake up and they feel that they really, you know, are not able to tackle the most difficult tasks. So we want them to be all aware of these things. So when doing project lists, we also want to make sure that we operationalize the to-do list. Like, what are the next actions that we have to do? So what is the next thing that we have to do in order to tackle that project? And then what are the things that we're waiting for? This is a typical teen excuse. Oh yeah, I was going to do, well, not just teen, this is a typical excuse for everybody. Yes, I was going to finish that IEP, but I'm waiting for, you know, this other team member to submit her part. And then the done list, you know, you always want to reinforce, like, all the things that you finished this day, not so much, you know, what you didn't do, but what you were able to complete. And as a rule of thumb, I always try to review projects once a week. And this I think now is more important than ever to be organized and disciplined. So here's a list of different resources. Starfall is great for little young children that are learning how to read. PBS Learning Media has wonderful videos with resources and questions. Duolingo has a free trial, so this is a great time to learn a second language. And surprisingly, many of my students with autism are bilingual. They like, well, some of them, their families are bilingual, but I have other students that are just interested in learning second languages so this applies to everybody. And then Adventure Academy has little cartoons that are appropriate for younger children as well. For older children, we have classroom magazines at Scholastic. Time for Children that are free. Books is more storybooks. And there's also audiblestories.com that is also a free resource that is very helpful. Math, I have discovered in the past 2 weeks that Khan Academy has all these wonderful free courses that you can take. There's also Adapted Mind, Tumble Math, Beast Academy. Those are all free resources for math, and they are very, very helpful. Many times our children with autism, all children actually, struggle with math because they're not as fluent in their math facts. So even if you're not a great math person, you can certainly practice, math facts with your children. And this is just a wonderful time to do that. Science also has Khan Academy, has great Adapted Mind, and Kids National Geographic has wonderful resources for all ages. And then this is a little bit of let's see if this is from PBS Learning Media. So this is just an example of what you can get through when you get these lessons. So you have, the video Flying Through the Galaxy, you have support materials, handouts, more reading, and then discussion questions. So this is all pretty much set up for you, which is great. So now, of course, this is our fantasy of homeschooling, the perfectly organized house, the child reading by herself, right? That's the way it always goes. And this is kind of the reality, especially when you try to get them out of their iPads or the TV. Sometimes they're not going to be happy. So we have an option, we can call Mary Poppins. So that's one alternative. Or, we can get an FBA. So, and really, what is an FBA? An FBA is just a process where we're going to figure out what is motivating the behavior. So, Arise Consulting, they if you've ever worked with them, they think about the 4 A's of function. So you have attention, the child is doing it because you're paying attention to him. Access to tangible. The child is engaging in the behavior when you take something that they want away, or because they want access to whatever they want, so they want to have, the 10th popsicle, so you don't give it to them, then they have a tantrum. Or it's avoidance or escape. So as soon as you present all that wonderful lesson that you work so hard to do, then you realize that the child is not cooperating. Why? Because he doesn't want to do, your math facts, the fluency activity that you work so hard to plan. And then, one of the hardest behavior is automatic or sensory. So those are the behaviors that they do because they like to do. And the clue for this one is that if you leave them alone and they do it again and again and again, that's a hint that it might be automatic or sensory behavior. So pretty much most of the functional behavior activities can be done remotely. So there's many ways to do functional behavior assessments. One of them is to do an observation, which we can do through Skype or FaceTime, and then come up with a hypothesis about factors that are maintaining the behaviors. Like, I think this looks automatic to me. I think, if we were to leave him alone and let's just leave him alone for a while and he does it again and again, it might be that it's automatic. So you formulate a hypothesis, and then you can also do indirect assessments, which is basically asking the caregiver, like, what do you think is causing the behavior? Do you think it's, it's more, is it happening more when you take away things? Is it happening more when you leave him alone? Is it happening more when you're not paying attention to him? And then we can do descriptive assessments, of course. We can collect data, see what happened before, what happened after. I have the feeling that families are going to be a little bit busy right now, so the chances of having great data collection right now, I think, are reduced, given how busy we all are. There's also treatment probes. So sometimes we have a hypothesis. We say, let's do something. How about if you pay attention to him every 5 minutes? Every 5 minutes you say, good job, good job, you're doing a great job doing this, and then you just look at him, play with him, you know, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. And then hopefully the behavior will go away. And that will lead us to think that, you know, the behavior was attention maintained. And then lastly, we can do an analog assessment. I think this would be where you systematically present different treatments and then collect data. Again, you know, this is actually can be very effective. So if you try all these things, you know, you try this, you try that, you know, you do indirect assessments, you even collect some data, and you can't figure the behavior out, and the behavior is dangerous, like people are getting hurt, then maybe it's time to do an analog assessment or a functional analysis. So definitely these are all activities that can be done remotely. So rather than, you know, waiting until the behavior gets more and more severe, and, you know, I think we're going to be in our homes for a while. I think definitely a functional behavior assessment would be the way to go. All right, well, thank you so much, and I will stop share. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vargas-Irwin. Sorry, I almost said that backwards. My apologies. So our next presenter will be Stacey Gay. She is the program director at JRI, Justice Resource Institute for Early Childhood Training and Consultation Programs. Since 2011, Stacey has worked with the Early Childhood Training and Consultation Program as an early childhood consultant and trainer. And now, as I said, she's the program director. And we're really pleased to have her talk with us about issues around trauma and mental health concerns that are that pre-existed COVID-19 and that might be coming up now in the face of this pandemic. Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. This is certainly the first time I'm presenting a training through a webinar instead of in person with a room full of people. So I'm going to do the best that I can to give you some tips on how to support children in the face of the coronavirus. And hopefully the computer will cooperate here. So the first thing I want to talk about is just, you know, certainly we're at a time frame where we are experiencing a time of trauma, and we want to think about ways that we can help children through this. So certainly if we think about the definition of trauma, that definition is typically used to describe an experience or situation that can be emotionally painful or distressing, and that affects our ability to be able to cope. And the thing that I want you to think about when we're thinking about how to help children is our own reactions and our own ability to cope, because children are looking at us and they're looking at how we are reacting. So why are we talking about this now? We are in the midst of a global pandemic. This is an exposure to an overwhelming event, which is an example of an acute trauma. We're being asked to socially isolate in our homes, which significantly changes the needs of the children that we are caring for, who are now spending all of their time at home instead of in their classrooms. And certainly we need to understand how that stress impacts our students and our children so that we can explain it to them in a language that they can understand and help them to normalize their responses so that they can also feel safe. So how we respond can impact how a child responds. And certainly we need to also take a step back and understand what is happening in our own bodies and recognize our own signs of how we're experiencing the stress and whether we're experiencing some signs of vicarious trauma or just complete burnout and exhaustion, especially for those of us who are now in a role of working remotely and providing education to our children, as well as trying to take care of our home and take care of our families. So the good news is that, you know, through time, we have learned that trauma changes the brain. That's not necessarily the good part, but the good part is that studies have revealed that traumatized children, if they're immersed in a emotionally safe environment with attachments with their caregivers, that can actually also change the brain, and thus that changes their behaviors. One of the leading experts in childhood trauma, Dr. Bruce Perry, I've read a book and seen lots of different quotes that have been popping up from him on social media recently. But certainly, he has found that it's our daily interactions with children in a loving and emotionally responsive way that really can bring about healing from trauma. And that's really what's going to help children through this time. So it becomes very important for us to create environments which help children and which really focus on our relationships with children, whether we're doing it as providers or whether we're doing it as their parents. Children can be very resilient and do well despite the adversity that we're all facing right now. So during this time when we're being asked to be socially distant, there are still ways to be socially connected and to really develop emotionally close relationships with children. So how do we support children? There's certainly 4 components about creating a responsive and nurturing climate. And usually I'm teaching this to educators in the classroom, but it really holds true for what we're doing in our homes as well. So the first thing that we want to do is establish safety. We want to provide structure and routine. That predictability helps children to feel safe. We want to have relationships with children. Our consistent relationships, our gentle understanding, that leads to children being able to trust us. That's important not only as educators, but important in our caretaking role. We want to find the good. We want to notice the strengths that our children have. We want to reinforce their behavior, their positive behavior, because that is going to lead to more positive behavior. And we want to lend emotional support. So verbal praise, physical warmth, that is all going to lead to building children's ego and their growth. So before we can offer support, it's important to really keep in mind that children are looking to us to see how we're coping. They can sense our level of stress, so we have to be mindful of that. So before you can offer support to a child, check yourself first. Am I in control of my emotions? Am I calm? What is my face and my body language saying? Our calmness can help a child to self-regulate and to relax. Hold on, I'm freezing a little bit here. So what can we do to manage anxiety? Certainly during this time, I'm going to backtrack here for a second. I hit too many things. Certainly during this time, we might see that children are experiencing some increased anxiety, some increased signs of depression. And so we need to figure out ways that we can help to manage that. Certainly, we recommend avoiding excess exposure to the news, the media. Turn off that TV. It's certainly something that we don't want the children overhearing and seeing too much. And as some of the panelists have already spoken to, creating a routine and a schedule is very important. It helps children to have a predictable day. They're used to being in their classroom all day where they know what's coming next. And here they're at home for an extended period of time, and we don't want it to be all about what it would be like if they were on school vacation. We want them to have a routine, a schedule, and give them some predictability to their routine. Certainly add time in the day for exercise, for self-care. That's very important. There's so many great tools out there, aside from just being able to go outside and take a walk or go on the swing set for the young kids. There's great apps out there for yoga. There's great apps out there for exercise. And certainly, whatever you have in your home is always great. I know my children have been using our old treadmill and our weights and things to stay active. Most important, it's important to really reassure children that they are safe. And certainly this is a scary time for all of us. And so we want to reinforce that they are safe in our homes and that everybody is doing what they can to keep their loved ones safe and healthy. So there's always a silver lining to all the social isolation. We're always on the go and busy with all of our routines, but this is really a time where we can create opportunities for a fun family time. So having meals together, playing games, doing puzzles, going for walks, movie nights, just dancing and laughing and singing. Creating all that time is going to create those memories. And I think back to one of the panelists earlier, the quote that she read from that superintendent's letter. I mean, those are the things that kids are going to remember, that we want them to remember about this time, instead of the stressors that we might all be thinking about. and certainly find ways to be socially connected, whether that be through phone, through texting, through all the different social and virtual media platforms. I mean, certainly base that on the age of your child. I know my 11-year-old daughter the other day had a Zoom play date with 12 of her friends, and she was on that for a while. They were even playing Crazy Eights together. So there's creative ways that children can still play with each other and be involved with each other. And also remember that children respond differently based upon their age. There's a great resource, the link is at the end of this PowerPoint that will be shared later, but the National Child Traumatic Stress Network has a guide in helping children to cope, and they really break it down based on the age group of the child, so from preschool to school age to teenage years. And there's a great chart that shows a description of what a child's reaction may be and how we can help them. So for example, a preschooler might start to have bad dreams due to their fear, or some speech difficulties, maybe changes in their appetite, or changes in their toileting issues, or increased temper tantrums. So things that we can do to help them, certainly having patience and tolerance, providing the reassurance that they need, that they are safe, encouraging them to express their feelings, whether it be through play or storytelling, and then allowing maybe some changes in what's typical for them. So maybe a change in their sleeping arrangements, or maybe providing some different calming activities before bedtime. And certainly avoiding media exposure and maintaining regular family routines. So those are some of the examples for the preschool children. For school-age children, you know, they increase some of that by also talking about ways to engage in educational activities, and talking about ways that you can talk to children in a developmentally appropriate way. Certainly children can hear and understand what is going on during this time in different ways based on their, not only their chronological age, but their developmental age. And, you know, we know that teens are having an even harder time, because this is the time where they want to be with their friends. That's developmentally appropriate for them to be off with their friends, and a lot of things that they're used to engaging in, sports and prom and different things are on hold right now. So finding ways that they can still stay in touch with their friends, whether it be through phone or the internet, or even through video games, right now is a way for them to still be connected with their friends when they can't be out in public due to the social distancing. But at the same time, having real conversations with them, and discussing ways that they might be able to be part of a community, and ways that they might be able to do things. Children are, you know, are very resilient, and children like to be helpers. So if you think even from the preschool child to the teen years, you know, preschool children, they love to help us set the table and fold washcloths and things. Teenagers like to be part of making a difference in this world, and so finding some maybe ways that they can volunteer for different groups, helping you know, make masks, or different things that people are doing in response to what's going on in our society right now. Certainly, what becomes very important is really working with children on how they can express their feelings during this time and their emotions. So it is really important to talk to children about their feelings, to validate what they're feeling, and to really help them identify. A young child might not be able to understand what they're feeling, so they might need you to label it for them. There's so many great stories out there about different feelings. There's a website called the, well, I'm very much involved with the National Pyramid Model Consortium, but the former website called CEFL, the Center for Social Emotional Foundations of Early Learning, has this great book nook list of all different books about feelings. And I know, you know, there's a lot of resources out there with libraries having chances to kind of get some books. And you might even have some in your own home. There's also a lot of great scripted stories out there right now for helping children to kind of learn and master what is going on around them right now. When working with children on expressing their emotions, it becomes important to also model our own emotions. So you could do that through games, you could do that through using a mirror, you can do that through different songs that are out there, and just teach children how to be able to express all the different emotions on their faces. Certainly some activities you can do with them. You know, you might be able to make an emotions book with them. Just making sure that they know that their feelings are okay, and that how they, you know, we want to just be mindful of how they express them. We want to give them safe ways to be able to express them, but their feelings are okay. You know, and each child reacts differently. My youngest of 4, she's 11, and right now she's having a great time painting and doing things that make her feel happy. And, so she might be painting things like flowers and rainbows, but another 11-year-old might be painting things with anger and scribbling and being really mad that this virus has taken away their time with their friends. Certainly, this is a time for also teaching children how to manage those feelings. So there's a lot of great resources out there in terms of helping children to learn how to take deep breaths, breathing in through their nose and out through their mouth, having opportunities to be able to express those mad feelings. You can kind of create a mad space for them where they can kind of punch a pillow or rip some paper or stomp or whatever it may be, but just in a controlled, safe environment. And it's also really important to let them know that it is okay to take a break. So especially when more and more school systems are providing online learning opportunities for them right now, sometimes if that math problem is really going to cause a complete meltdown and a temper tantrum, it's okay to take a break and move on to something else, or to go and engage into something else that will help them to calm down and self-regulate. And sometimes it might even be worthwhile, in looking at, your week and say, okay, this day is going to be a different day. This is our take a break day. This is pajama day. Stay in our pajamas, watch movies and take a break from everything that is going on around us online and in the media. We recommend, when we consult in childcare programs, to create calm down areas. So that is a great strategy to use at home as well. Children love to have a little area that they can go in that can have different things that bring comfort to them: comfortable pillows, stuffed animals, books, maybe some Play-Doh, some sensory tools. I know the first week of being homebound, my children built forts, and my youngest slept in that fort a couple of nights because she had all of her favorite things with her. So sometimes having that area where children can go and be able to engage in things that will regulate themselves is really important. By Calm Down Yoga, there's lots of apps right now for yoga. There are lots of different programs out there, but even just coming up with your own poses to try to help kids to calm their bodies down. And we're also big proponents of sensory play. So whatever you can do to give them opportunities to engage in, use of Play-Doh, shaving cream, whatever you have at home, is very helpful for them. And then do all these things to teach self-regulation. So self-regulation is really important, especially when they're displaying, having that meltdown. So engage in things like freeze dance and Simon Says and marching like an animal. All those things help children learn how to listen to directions and calm their bodies down and move on to the next step. These are just some pictures of some quiet areas. When I was on Google looking up some different samples, we have different pictures that we show to educators, but these are some things that you might be able to do at home just with what you have around. One of the things, the last couple of weeks, I think we've all spent a lot of time on the computer and looking at different resources. And I found this particular slide to be very helpful. It was shared. I want to give credit to Samira Zahir, who posted it and gave permission for it to be shared as long as credit was given to her. But it's really important to shift our minds during this pandemic. And when I've taught trainings before on de-escalating challenging behaviors and different things, we really talk about how in our own minds we can reframe things so that we can look at it through the eyes of a child and look at it through our own lens in terms of self-care. So this I thought was really perfect. So changing the I'm sick at home to I get to be safe in my home and spend time with my family. Changing the fear of I will get sick to I will self-isolate and wash my hands, and this will decrease my chances of getting sick. Changing our mindset from I will run out of items at home during the social self-isolation to I have prepared for this and I will use what I have at home wisely and I have everything I need for now. Changing our mindset from everything is shutting down, I'm panicking, to the most important places such as medical centers, pharmacies, and grocery stores are still open. Obviously, we still want to keep in mind the social distancing when we have to go to those places. And changing our mindset from there's too much uncertainty right now to, well, I can't control the situation around me, I can control my actions. Doing breath work, calling loved ones, getting enough sleep and nutrition, prayer, and doing activities I love at home will help me during this time. So I found that particular slide to be really, really resonated with me as I was preparing for this, and hope that all of you can also find ways to kind of shift that anxiety and that fear that we have right now to what we can do and how we can help cope with it. So my takeaway messages, just a couple of things to think about. Certainly, if you notice increased symptoms of anxiety and depression in your children or in yourselves, or if you have health concerns about them engaging in any type of self-harm, it is incredibly important to call 911, to call your physician, to call providers who can help you with that. There are many clinical therapists that are providing therapy remotely with the aid of virtual platforms. I know my colleagues are providing therapy through telehealth right now, and that's for all ages, young children on up. Insurance companies have a list of providers who are able to do that, and it's really important if you notice, an increase in these symptoms to seek help. Make sure you have reasonable expectations. Just a reminder, it's okay to take a break. It's okay for the children not to be on the computer for too many hours doing schoolwork. Give them time to take a break. It is different right now. We're not in the classroom, we're at home, and we're all managing different things and doing the best that we can. And certainly find ways to provide praise when you see positive behaviors in your children. They're experiencing a lot as we are, and so whatever moments you see that are positive, let them know that you're noticing them, that you see them, that you hear them, that you are proud of them, and that we want them to engage in those positive behaviors right now. And certainly support your child's social and emotional development. You add emotions into everything that you're doing. Add it into your conversation about the movie that they watched, about the books that they're reading, about what they're doing in their schoolwork, and of course keeping in mind their developmental age. Certainly during this time of increased screen time, it's even more important for us to engage with children and connect with children. Normally I'm of the mindset where I'm asking educators and parents to give less screen time, especially with young children when their brains are developing. But right now, that's our source of social connection. So it becomes really important to do that in an appropriate way and to engage with children and talk to them about what they're seeing on the screen and really help them to make sense of it. And just remember, tomorrow is a new day. We're going to get through this together, and we're going to keep on working, and we're going to have a different outcome as time moves on. So just another little visual that I found, that a way to take care of you. Just the little sticky notes here. Slow down, keep calm, be positive, enjoy life, breathe. Very important, breathe. Take time to go outside, meditate, whatever you find joy in, whether it's that art and craft project, whether it's, some people are liking organizing their closets right now, whatever the case may be, find that time to do things that you can help take care of you. Because in order for you to take care of your children, you need to take care of you too. So thank you so much for having me, and that's all I got for now. And I'll just include that I do have the links, and this will come to you separately, of some of the main websites that I highly recommend that you use, including the CDC website, and the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and the National Pyramid Model Network.
I'll just jump in very quickly. Stacey, we're getting lots of questions about your PowerPoint, and I just want to remind everybody that we will upload the PowerPoint just after this presentation. So bear with us. Tim, Misa?
Yes, hello. So we're getting ready to enter into our Q&A session. With Beth Bostic and Meredith Chambers will be moderating and asking our questions. There was one thing I noted on the question and answer, which I'm just going to jump in and answer right now. Someone asked about how much instruction per day, whether there's guidance from DESE on how much instruction per day is supposed to be provided. And in the March 30th letter to parents, to families across the state from Commissioner Jeffrey Riley, it's dated March 30th, and is part of the handout packet. The guidance is for schools to provide roughly a half of a school day's worth of instruction through a combination of teacher-directed and student self-directed instruction. So it isn't specific as to, for example, whether the teacher-directed should be live in a sort of a webinar a setting like this. I think that is encouraged, but I know that there might be recorded lessons being done as well. So I just wanted to point that out, that is some of the guidance that's coming. There are a couple of other questions that might get into more legal issues around IEPs and things like that maybe Tim and I can address. But I also want to give enough room for our question moderators to get in those other questions. But before we do that, I just want to check in with Tim as to whether there's any news or update that you wanted to share with us.
So as we've been meeting, the state special education directors have been meeting with Russell Johnson, the Associate Commissioner for Special Education. And I've been getting just little tidbits of what's been going on in that meeting. That meeting is I think the fourth in a series of meetings that he's had with the special education directors as a approach how to resolve the issues with regard to school closures. And just a couple of little things. I mean, there have been guidances issued before, and they're on part of the handouts, obviously. In terms of new things, my understanding is that he is encouraging school districts to hold team meetings, but telling them that they should essentially triage the meetings. And that is, look at the ones that are the most important right now in terms of providing services, particularly for those students transitioning from, elementary school to middle school to high school. They've also agreed that students who are in early intervention and who would be transitioning into IA, public school programs, preschool programs, that they can carry forward their early intervention services, and schools can implement those without having meetings immediately. There's going to be a lot more. There's a PowerPoint that is going to be posted later today that will have some more details, but there still remain lots and lots of questions. But the place to check is at the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education website. There's a COVID-19 special education page, which is where these guidances get posted. And we just added to the handouts a resource from the state that I think was just recently updated that has a lot of helpful suggestions about things that can be done around providing distance learning to the students. But I see that there's hundreds of questions, so I'll stop there.
Sorry, Lisa, I'll just jump in and let people know that there's also a link on the SPAN COVID page that links right to the DESE page, so it might be an easier way to get there. Sometimes the DESE page can be cumbersome.
Okay.
And just same with the Federation. So wherever you go, you can find those links.
All right, and with that, I'll turn it over to Beth and Meredith. Beth Bostic and Meredith, I should clarify.
I was just looking at the clock. Good afternoon.
Hello.
I know that I am the one thing that's between you and lunch, so we're going to get through as many as we possibly can. Like our last webinar, there's a lot of questions here, and we have limited time, so we're going to do our best to pick some that seem to have some common themes, and then follow up with people with answers to questions that we're not able to hit today. Okay, so one question in particular is it possible to get IEP goal progress reports and just general progress reports from general ed at this time? So what are people's thoughts on that?
So I think I have an answer. I know that Russell Johnson's working on this, and I don't know whether it was addressed, but I know that it's being considered, and I believe that the consensus is going to be that school districts should issue progress reports for the last grading period that existed. Whether there'll be progress reports for this school closure time is a whole different question, but obviously it would be virtually impossible for those to be meaningful. But I do believe that schools are going to be told to issue the progress reports that should have been, that are due now or should have been due during the period of closure.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Another question is that there's mentions that there are some behavioral techs that are actually going into the home now. Could someone speak about under what set of circumstances this may be appropriate under our current COVID-19 stay home order?
I'll be happy to answer that. So some school districts are continuing to fund home services. And then in the insurance world, some families have had services be in their homes. Typically what we do is we reduce teams. Instead of having 2 or 3 behavior technicians, we only have 1 behavior technician for each home, and everybody's otherwise socially isolated. We are considered to be essential employees, so if the family and the behavior technician feel comfortable, we can go to the homes.
Great.
I would just add to that I've been working with a couple of situations where we've got students with really significant behavioral needs who did not have home services from the school district in their IEPs. And for one reason or another can't access direct services in the home from insurance paid. I have been able to convince school districts in a couple instances to administratively amend IEPs or enter into settlement agreements to provide some services in the home.
Great. All right. Dr. Vargas, there was a question specifically for you about saying that hours in a treatment plan or IEP is the minimum to be provided, but this parent has been told it's the maximum without referral and approval from a funding source. Can you speak to how that parent might be able to work through that dilemma?
So for insurance, the way insurance authorizations work is you have a bulk of 6 months. So you have, say if you have 20 hours a week, you have 20 hours times 26. So you can use those hours, you can start using those hours as you would like. Eventually though, towards the end of the authorization period, you're going to run out of hours. So if you're going to provide more than those 20 hours a week that you actually requested, you want to talk to the insurance company first. Otherwise, you're going to run out of hours at the end of the 6 months. Hopefully, in 6 months, we'll be back in school, so we won't need as many hours. But that is the situation with insurance. For school districts, many school districts have approved the hours that are already in the IEP for home services. But like Tim explained, if, say, for example, you had 30 hours of one-to-one at school, that doesn't necessarily mean that you automatically get 30 hours at home. You would get, like Tim explained, about half of a school day, and then it would be remote as opposed to live.
Thank you. One person expressed a concern about training parents to be behavior techs and wondering if this is a slippery slope. So because after this is all over, would that become the expectation of parents long term? Can anyone speak to that concern?
Well, the parent is the caregiver. You know, there's nothing that we can do that is more important than what the parent does every day. I think the concern has always been, well, are then, you know, schools or insurance companies going to turn around and say, oh, well, you're trained as a behavior technician, so you don't need to be working, we don't need to give you home services or school services or any kind of support. I think that's unlikely. Most of the most successful families that I have, the parents have been trained, the siblings have been trained. So basically every waking moment, the child is receiving services, and those have been the most successful cases. So I think that's unlikely. And at this point, we just have to do this. I don't think there's any other option at this point than to have the family be as trained as we possibly can.
Does anybody have any hints or clues on how to support ABA services at the same time that a parent is working?
Well,
That question has come up like multiple times. I'm just, so it's
no. Well, it's a challenge.
As being a challenge
for everything. I mean, it's a challenge for me and my daughters. They're quietly on their phones right now. They've been on their phones all morning, and I don't think they're doing schoolwork. So, I mean, I think really that's one of the things that I've been doing with my students. So I have a lot of students that the parents are physicians. So they are literally, they're saving lives as we speak. So what I do say is I meet with them 1 hour a week, or another behavior analyst or a behavior technician, and we go through, you know, this schedule. This is what we're going to do together. This is what you're going to do by yourself. And that's where the behavior technician, where the behavior technician and the behavior analyst come in. So we can go and work, you know, with the child, part of it independently, part of it with them, while mom and dad are saving lives, are first responders, are, you know, helping us get food to the table. So yeah, so I think this is the way that we can help, and then teachers can also help. I have the feeling, and you know, probably Tim is and Lisa are better able to speak for the school, but I have the feeling that schools will soon be providing more, not a full 6-hour day, but at least more services, so then parents, you know, can work at the same time. I think the real challenge is the children that need, the children that are not compliant, that are not going to do things that you tell them to do when you're on Skype or FaceTime or Zoom. And that's where the parents are going to have to take turns taking care of that child, whoever is on that child, like a little toddler that needs the ABA, or a child with an older child that needs 24/7 care because of behavior. Somebody is taking care of that child at this point. And then that is where the parent training comes in, or caregiver training. So we are training a lot of siblings that are home from school, from college. And this is the time to do that.
Yeah, I'm working with the family where a family actually came together and prevented a united front. And it's created some really interesting dynamics, but it's also moved a child much further ahead because of the uniformity of the approach. Stacey and Ann, what are your thoughts around this? Either one can jump on.
Yeah. You know, I think this is, again, a collaborative effort, and I think it's wonderful when multiple members of the family can be involved in supporting a student that has behavior challenges. So, you know, I think the more that we can work in a collaborative effort, not only with the family, but also with the school, I think that's really very helpful.
I agree, and I think sometimes it takes thinking outside of the box a little bit, you know, looking at scheduling in terms of, you know, sometimes we might have to change our thoughts and maybe do something earlier in the morning or add a lunch break. I know we're not taking our typical lunch break, but, you know, we, as working people, we still also need to take some breaks, and so we might have to find some time during those breaks to be able to be in contact with the providers who are trying to support our children. I know for early childhood, you know, using their nap time as a time to connect with people has been, but it is a balance, and we're all, you know, we have to be careful because we're at a point where I think some of us are working more hours from home than we were when we were in the office. So that's where our own self-care comes into play, and figuring out our own schedules and how we can still meet the needs of our children and get our work done too.
So I think that's a really important point that you're making, Stacey. I hear from teachers all the time that that they're working 11, 12 hours days, trying to get things online, and then they still have kids at home. And I think we have to acknowledge that and acknowledge the stress that's there. Appreciate what they are able to do, because it's yeah, it's a new world for teachers as well.
This is Lisa, I just want to jump in and say also that I think that makes a lot of sense, that the collaborative and working together and being patient and understanding this is all a lot of work for so many people in this new world. And also, however, that the other thing parents can do is document what services they are getting, what type of service, what they're not getting, just to keep track of what services are being provided while all these things are in process, and everybody's kind of figuring out the right way to provide the ABA services that are needed, because a lot of kids aren't probably going to get everything that they need. Some are in. There's a wide variety of how districts are addressing this, and some are saying we can't provide services because of the health concerns, and that the ABA in the home is prohibited under Governor Baker's orders, but clearly that's not the case. So there's a lot of, not consistent messaging happening. So documenting and keeping track, and I know that's just one more thing to add to your to-do list, but I think that's important. I think Tim has something to add. Tim, you're muted.
Take yourself off mute.
So while he's getting that set, I do want to let people know it's 12:30.
Yes.
So maybe we have time for one more question after Tim, or we might need to wrap this up.
Right.
Okay.
Tim, go ahead.
Some quick takeaways from the meeting this morning, this is responsive to some of the questions. Telehealth is being worked out. The speech requirement, ASHA, the professional association, is waiving the 10 hours of instruction they're supposed to have. OT is fine. Everybody's working together, so it looks like the telehealth problems will be worked out. There are some concerns around consent and notice. And just to be clear, the state has told school districts that consent's not necessary, but that notice is required, that they have to provide notice to families that we're going to provide education in this manner. The state is developing a model notice. I noticed that some school districts are requiring consents. And, all I can say about that is, maybe people should be reporting this to the state, to Russ Johnson, and I would also suggest going to PRS about it. One of the other things that came up during the discussion is the letter from the National Association of School Superintendents that's mentioned in the questions in the chat here. And that's something people should be very aware of. And just to clarify things a little bit, so as part of CARES, Secretary DeVos was given the power to waive requirements under certain laws, but not under IDEA or Section 504. It was under ESSA and under the Carl Perkins Vocational Act, and one other I can't remember, but not particularly relevant to us. What it did say about IDEA and Section 504 is that Secretary DeVos is supposed to report to Congress as to whether or not any waivers should be given. And then Congress will determine about waivers. So 2 areas of advocacy for everybody. Letters to Secretary DeVos, don't waive, this is important. Letters to your congressional delegation, obviously. Now I'll stop with that.
I will jump in and just piggyback on that a little bit. COPA, a national organization, has got an action alert, and we have linked to that. So if you want more information about those type of activities that Tim was mentioning, again, on our COPA page, you can find a link that'll take you to a lot more of that information. With that, Lisa, do you think that we should wrap this up at this point, or do you think we have time for one more question?
Well, if our panelists are good with one more question, if you have something queued up, Beth, that you think is really important for us to address, then.
I think it's more of a technical question that I think you and Tim could probably answer pretty quickly, but I think it's a question that's been coming up pretty consistently, and that is around parents who are not used. All of us have been experiencing learning how to interact on Zoom over the last couple of weeks. Some parents don't have training on how to do that, and if all of their services, including ABA, are being provided that way, what is the district's responsibility for providing training to the parents so that they can actually access that service?
Well, as I recall from the last meeting that Russell Johnston had last week with school district special education directors, my understanding is that, and that this came up during the discussion, is that part of providing this new remote learning plans to families is actually helping parents to be able to manage this at home. And so I would argue that part of that is training these parents how to use these platforms. And so if a parent, or you're an advocate for a parent and they don't know how to do this, then I would proactively make sure that's part of the plan, and that they can't assume that, I mean, not everyone has a job where they're on Zoom meetings all day. So, so that is, I think that is an important part of it that was implied. And I don't know if the new guidance will reinforce that a little bit, I hope. But I think that's a really good point. And I think being proactive and saying, okay, so you can't assume that every parent, you know, in this town is ready to manage a Zoom meetings for their kids all day. So I think that's what I would say.
Let me just build from what Lisa was saying there, though, at the end. And that is, it's really, really important that on any of these issues that families are having about access, that it be communicated to the special education director, certainly to the team chair, to teachers, to others, but to the special education director, that it be communicated so that people know we need training, we need this. I mean, I you know, put a word of caution in here. We have a guidance, you know, it's not a mandate, it's not a directive. They're not under any obligation to report on any of this stuff to the state. It is a guidance. And so we don't technically have a good fallback position. I mean, if you really want to, you know, do the ultimate and get the right to have training, you're going to have to amend the IEP. And we know that that's not going to happen in this world today. But parents, by acting nicely. The other thing is, there's lots and lots of resources out there. It doesn't all fall on the school district. I mean, a lot of local community education groups. I know in Newton, you know, there's a seminar this afternoon on effective use of Zoom. There are a million seminars on the internet for people to be able to look at this. And so, you know, I'd say, yeah, sure, ask the school, but also look for yourself. Again, this is a very, very difficult time. You're not going to get FAPE, you know, you're not going to get the services your child needs. What you're going to do is have to work with people to try and communicate what your child needs and how you have to problem solve about how things might work, because it's going to be done in your home with your family, and you're in a better position to drive things than most school districts. So work together.
And I'd also just add to that lean into your local CPACs, because they may be able to point you towards some resources, or even just, you know, within the Federation, the parent-to-parent network. There are people out there who have expertise, or just may be able to say, this is what I've learned. And, you know, it doesn't have to necessarily be formal training as much as somebody else who's in the exact same seat that you're in and can tell you what has worked for them. So, you know, as parents, we've all learned sometimes your best resources happen to be other parents.
That's very good advice. There might actually be somebody in that CPAC who does spend their day on Zoom meetings all day, be able to tell you how to do that. So
Day in and day out. Yes.
That's great. So I think we'll end with that. Beth, go ahead.
So I think with that, we need to wrap things up. I would like to say, I hope that you all agree, when we work together, we find solutions that are more likely to be successful. Climate and culture matters. Harsh words that are spoken behind closed doors often resonate behind those doors and set a tone that we just cannot afford at this time. I want to thank all of our presenters, everybody that participated in one way, shape, or form, and I would like to turn this over to Pam to close us out here today.
Thank you very much, Beth. I also would like to extend a very warm thank you to our presenters, and for all of you who have participated, submitted questions, been a part of this. We will be having the link to this presentation available on both the Federation and SPAN websites. Now, I'd like to reiterate some of those last statements. Reach out to your CPACs. You know, they're a tremendous resource. The Family Engagement Center, part of the Federation, actually has just put together a training for parents on using Zoom that we'll be making available. So as people have been saying, there are a lot of resources available. If you have questions, please reach out to our organizations. We want to be continuing this collaboration. And again, thank you for being part of this today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.